Welcome. I am your host, Cindy, and excited to have you here. Today, we're talking with Alyssa Devine about negotiating IP protection for creatives. Kind of an interesting topic. And it's great to have you here, Alyssa. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. And thank you for inviting me today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, me too. I don't know a lot about IP. I already always shied away from it, but I know it's important. And for our listeners out there, if you don't know Alyssa, she is the founder and managing attorney of Purple Fox Legal, which I love. We're going to have to find out what that's about. And she's created a unique law firm focused on intellectual property law, but specifically for creatives and entrepreneurs. And Alyssa is not only a lawyer, but has also earned an MBA from Indiana University. And she's been spotlighted for accomplishments by Indiana University, the Robert McKinney School of Law. And she also enjoys giving back, which I love, through volunteering. She was awarded the Norman Lefstein Award of Excellence for volunteering over 500 pro bono hours. So hats off to you, Alyssa. And why don't you tell us, how did you come to do this work?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, I originally entered law school thinking I would be a criminal prosecutor, believe it or not. So that was sort of step one. And I went to a lot of different lectures and talked to a lot of different attorneys, and I kept coming back to intellectual property. And as I continued to attend these lectures and do informational interviews, I discovered that intellectual property is very, very closely connected with business principles.
Yeah.
You sort of had to understand both to give the best service. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I enrolled in the joint JD MBA program at Indiana University and had no social life for 4 years
I bet you overachiever.
To complete that program, but it was very worthwhile. I was able to do a lot of different experiences in both programs that helped my overall understanding of how to best serve clients. And I also realized that there are many, many times where the best business decision is not the best legal decision, or vice versa. And really, as an attorney, it's my job, my role to educate my clients so that they can make an informed decision, but I cannot make that decision for them.
Yeah, that's quite a negotiation. I'm going to want to circle back to that. But I wondered, how did you come to focus on creatives? It's funny, when most people think of intellectual property, they immediately picture big business. So I love that you've taken that niche area of law. And, as someone, I like to think of myself as a creative. How did you come to focus on that group?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that intellectual property is misunderstood by society and by the legal community in some aspect. So there are really 5 types of intellectual property. Patents is always the first one people think about, but there's also trademarks and trade secrets,
Yeah.
copyrights, and publicity rights, which is sort of the one I think gets left behind quite a bit because it is state-based and the rules vary, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Yeah.
But there are 5 types of intellectual property. And at the end of the day, 4 of those, I would argue, play an essential role in small business, with the exception of patents maybe not having quite as much interaction with small business, but the other 4, absolutely.
Okay. And why is it so important to negotiate? It's the protection of IP. I think a lot of people don't consider it, especially creatives and small business owners. I think it's not on the radar typically. So tell us a bit about that.
So in order for creatives to, understand IP, recognize IP, they just have to educate themselves. And part of that is identifying credible sources of information. And as I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of misinformation out there about intellectual property and about what businesses need when they're initially starting up. For example, trademark. Well, there are some websites that say they can get you a trademark registration in a couple of days. Well, that's not possible. The United States Patent and Trademark Office has a waiting period of at least 8 months, from the time you get your registration filed to the time it's assigned to a trademark examining attorney. So identifying credible sources of information and to help prioritize, okay, what do we really need to focus on here? So with, in trademarks, I think is probably the first priority for creatives and small businesses, because you need to be able to protect your name, your personal name, and also, your business name, if that is different from, your surname.
Yeah. And what
So,
do you consider a creative, if you don't mind me asking?
there's of course the traditional kind of concept of creatives, but in my mind, if you're an entrepreneur, you're an innovator, you're also a creative.
Yeah.
And part of that is because you have to be creative in how you do business because of limited resources.
Yeah.
And also you have to be extremely creative because we're in a post-pandemic world. We
Yeah.
cannot do things the same as we've always done. We have to do them differently or we will not succeed.
Yeah, that's true. Now, you've done some really interesting work in negotiating to protect deceased celebrities' brands. Can you tell us a bit about that? I'm like, wow, I wouldn't have thought of that even as a niche area, but obviously it is. So tell us, how'd you come to get it, and what, if you can share any details about that, that'd be fun.
Yeah, so that was one of my internship opportunities actually during law school. And I was fortunate enough to work at that intellectual property management company. And their specialty is to protect the intellectual property of deceased celebrities, people such as James Dean and Maya Angelou, Jackie Robinson. So, really, really big names. And it was very, very fascinating work. And it certainly solidified my passion to pursue, intellectual property as a career.
Yeah, that's more juicy than the typical law school internships you get, for sure. That's fascinating. And
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
who are you negotiating to protect it against, like the brand? Like when you say James D or Jackie Robinson, like what? Because again, it wouldn't have crossed my mind, but I can imagine everybody would want a piece of it. So tell us a little bit about that.
So part of it was the enforcement piece, making sure that people didn't have permission to use that intellectual property, whether it be the trademarks, right of publicity, those sorts of things. Making sure that people without permission aren't using them on like t-shirts and other things like that. But another big part of it was developing partnerships, strategic partnerships. So for example, with Jackie Robinson, figuring out the best way to create different campaigns with, the Dodgers and with the MLB, Major League
Yeah.
Baseball, things like that, figuring out how to make these people relevant today and
Yeah.
how to creatively, use these intellectual property to generate interest in this brand, but also the brand that we're partnering with.
Yeah.
Sort of things like that was very, very key in that role.
Yeah, fun, very fun. And circling back at the beginning, you were talking about how, sometimes the legal decision and the business decision are at odds a little bit, and you're having to sort of, I would say, negotiate with your clients, if you will, to make sure they have the information. What tips or strategies do you have for people out there, or any experiences you had around that, negotiating that relationship as well?
Well, I'll actually provide an example that illustrates this point really well. So, about a month ago, it's been a while, the Barbie movie came out.
Yeah.
Everybody's all about Barbie.
Yes.
They they have different Barbie inspired posts, Barbie inspired parties, Barbie inspired, what all these sorts of things. And I see this as an intellectual property attorney and I'm cringing
Oh,
because a lot of this is trademark infringement,
yeah.
but it's not in the best interest of Mattel to stop these people.
Yeah.
Why? Because they want them to go see the movie.
Yeah.
They want them, which turned out to be in their best interest because it's the revenues exceeded $1 billion for
Wow.
that movie. So, best legal decision would be to go after these infringers to stop this use. Best business decision is to let it go
Oh,
and get people to go to the movie,
yeah.
incentivize that. So, when I say they're at odds, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about.
That is
But
such a great example. Like, oh my gosh. And I'm cringing. The reason I'm smiling on the other side is I'm like, oh my gosh, I was guilty of that. Because to be honest, I did not expect to like them. I had no intention of seeing the movie. And everybody kept saying, Cindy, you're gonna love it. I'm like, you know me. And they're like, Cindy, trust me, you're gonna love it. And I went, and sure enough, I did love it. And I wrote a blog post about it, and it got picked up somewhere else. So I am probably one of those people who was infringing their IP, but helped promote the movie because I was very complimentary. So that's a perfect example. And for our listeners, just want to highlight as well, when we're negotiating, we often forget, sometimes we're so focused on the thing, right? Like protect IP in this case, or whatever that thing is you're negotiating about, whether in your personal life or your professional life. sometimes think about the outcomes that, we forget, whether it's a relationship outcome, that the relationship is worth saving, or maybe even though, as Alyssa was saying, it's a violation, it actually serves your interests. So that's a super example about that. I love that. And do you find most clients take your advice on that, or do you often end up butting heads? And if so, how do you handle that?
Sometimes I'll provide a recommendation and they usually will go that route. But other times I just lay out the consequences that I can foresee for each decision and just kind of lay it at their feet. Like, here's what happened if you do this, here's what will happen if you do that. Like,
Yeah.
it's up to you to prioritize, your values and what you want the outcome to be, to
Yeah.
pick path A or path B.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that idea actually for negotiating even more broadly, Alyssa, right? And again, for our listeners there, whether this, I always say all of life is a negotiation. So whether it's in your personal life or your professional life or any of the spaces in between, sometimes, rather than taking a hardcore position on something, laying out options and consequences for people, whether it's with your kids, I'm thinking of in particular, right? You lay out the consequences and allow people to make their choices so that I think those kinds of negotiations get better buy-in. So switching gears for a moment, I'd love if you could talk to us about internal communication strategies in business, right? Like how to communicate with employees, for example, or how to increase retention for the clients that you're dealing with or beyond.
I think the first step to either establishing good communication or improving communication is understanding yourself and who you're communicating with.
Yeah.
So, for example, I'm very much aware that I'm an introvert and that I communicate best through writing and that I learn best through, visual aids or by doing.
Yeah.
I know that about myself. So when I'm talking to somebody, I can get some different hints or clues to figure out, what their best communication is or how they understand things. So some people are auditory. So when I send them an email explaining something briefly, that may not do the trick. We may need to do a phone call or a Zoom chat. And then once we have that, then they're like, okay, yes, got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I think that's great advice. We often have to think about who we are negotiating with as well. I'm glad when you said you're an introvert, it immediately struck a chord with me because I tend to be more extroverted, have been all my life. And our firstborn, my daughter, definitely introverted. And it was eye-opening for me. I read the book Quiet, which was brilliant. I don't know if you've read it. I love it. And it gave me a whole different insight and appreciation. I think we're a very extrovert-driven society, and we often don't allow the space, frankly, for introverts to make sure that their valuable input is included in the conversation. So I invite all of you to be really aware of who are you negotiating with, right? And who do you need to be to show up to be the best version of yourself and to get the best outcomes for yourself and for the other party that you're negotiating with. So I really love that. And what about increasing retention? That's a big conversation where we hear a lot about today with post-COVID, right? First, we heard about the great resignation, and, I like to think of it as a great reset. And as quickly as that was happening, we heard that there's a recession coming. So people are tightening their belts, but everybody's worried about, attracting, retaining top talent. Any tips on that?
I think this is something that's maybe people overthink this quite a bit. I think that it's more so simple, or at least it should be approached more simply. I think it's just a matter of figuring out what motivates your team and then rewarding their hard work with whatever motivates them. Kind of similar to understanding how people want to communicate. So, for example, some people are, well, I'd probably say most people are, incentivized to do better work, with, say, a bonus, some money. Other people are happy with a pat on the back or some other sort of just kind of simple gesture, or maybe even just a thank you note.
Yeah.
Maybe other people want, an award at the annual corporate meeting or something like that, recognition, widespread recognition throughout the company.
Yeah.
So it's not all about money. It's about rewarding people for their work and encouraging them to, take their own path on how they want to do things, not micromanaging. Like if you give somebody a job, let them do that job.
Yeah.
Don't do it for them.
Yeah, that's so true. I was bad at that for a while. I mean, I had to recognize my control issues and, and just get rid of them.
Yeah.
But I love that you're talking about this, that it's not all about money, because I mean, one of the things that prompted me to start the art of feminine negotiation, frankly, is that I think for so long we've defined success based on this very competitive model, this very win-lose model. Everything is about the almighty dollar and there is never enough. It's like more, more, more. So I would love if you chat about how do you define success? You know, I've been on a mission to say to people, we need to redefine and reframe how we look at what it means to be successful. What is success? What are your thoughts on that?
I think money can be a factor in the success equation, but not the entire thing.
Yeah.
For myself, I see success as the number of people that I've helped in one way or another.
Nice.
You know, obviously that's going to be clients, but also I've been very intentional lately about making strategic connections. So really like within my network. So for example, I had, one person in, my network who was looking for, more than, vendors, suppliers. And I
Mhm.
was like, okay, like, based on what they do, I actually know somebody over here that makes sense. Like, let's connect them and things like that. I'm trying to do better about connecting people and about maintaining and creating relationships for myself and for others,
Yeah.
because that's something I've always struggled on as an introvert.
Yeah.
And I think that developing the skill and sort of upskilling, as you might say, is how I define success. I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm not, as much as I'd love to stay in school forever, I can't. So I'm learning a different way now.
Yeah. That's great. And I love that. Who's it said? Tony Robbins claims it is his, but he borrowed it from somebody else. You know, if we're not growing, we're dying, right? And I think we often think I have to hit this pinnacle as if that's it. I mean, it's never a shame on us if we hit a pinnacle and then just stagnate, right? Things are ever changing, and I'm with you. I'm a big believer in lifelong learning as well. I get great joy in it. Now, what tips do you have on how to manage sort of big egos or strong personalities to, especially dealing with creatives, right? To find those more creative solutions amongst diverse personality types. Any tips on managing ego?
I encounter, bigger egos or maybe zealousness, I might say, with other attorneys most of the time. It's not my clients. So
Yes.
that can be difficult. Sometimes they're opposing counsel in litigation, which is, a whole nother thing. But just because we're opposing counsel in a pending matter doesn't mean respect is out the window.
Yeah.
At least that's my belief.
Yeah.
I've had some very, I'll say, unusual experiences with that. But at the end of the day, I can only control my behavior. I can't
Yeah.
control theirs or how they respond to things.
Yeah.
And I try to think to myself, okay, like if a judge or if like a news station saw what I wrote or what I said, like how would that be perceived on me? Because my reputation is the most important thing to me as an attorney. Once it's gone, it's gone. You can't ever get it back up to its original value. You can
Yeah.
try,
Yeah.
but it's very difficult.
Yeah. And it's funny because that's really at the heart of art of feminine negotiation. You've hit right on it, because it's all about, I think for effective negotiation, you need to be building rapport, building trust, building relationship, all about relationship. And I agree with you when so many lawyers, and I was guilty of this, to be honest. When I started, things have changed, but I was almost always the only woman. And it's like, we're so conditioned to believe that the only way to be taken seriously is to get scrappier. And with that comes this very confrontational approach that doesn't serve anybody. And that was one of my big epiphanies as well, is about the importance of really building relations. And it took me right back to growing up. My dad was always like drilling into us, everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, right? That was one of my core values. And our legal profession often, encourages the opposite. So
There's also the famous saying of, if you're good at arguing, you'll be a good lawyer. Well, I would contest that and challenge that quite a bit.
yes.
I think if you're good at arguing, you'd be a terrible lawyer,
Yeah.
because to me, the practice of law is not about arguing, it's about persuasion.
Yes.
You cannot persuade somebody that you're arguing with.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a beautiful distinction, Alyssa. I really like that. And I would say not just in law, but in life generally. So again, for all
Mm-hmm.
of our listeners, right? When you are out to win the argument, You know, we've been so conditioned to think the person talking the loudest and longest is winning the negotiation. And if you're not listening, you're losing, right? And it shouldn't be about winning or losing. It should be about finding better outcomes. And you're not going to do that when you're arguing. Now, representing creatives, I'm curious what role you think creativity plays in negotiation.
That's a much harder question. I let clients decide if they want to be at the forefront of negotiation. Personally, I'd like to do it, but I think that's more from a point of I want to improve my skills by getting more practice.
Yeah.
If a client has already built rapport with somebody, on a deeper level than I ever could, then that makes sense, and that's in their best interest for them to negotiate that transaction and for me to draft that according to their conversation.
Yeah.
So it's going to depend on the client, but it's not necessarily even creatives. It's just different people have a different way of approaching things, and that's okay.
Yeah. And being open and listening, I think, is so important, right? I mean, we're so conditioned to think, okay, I want this, eye on the prize, right? You hear that over and over again, as opposed to don't just keep on your eye on the purported prize you want, but what does the other side need and why do they need it? And how can we maybe find something even better than what I thought I wanted by being, God forbid, a little vulnerable in the conversation, right? It can be such a powerful shift. So what do you think are the key? You'd mentioned about skills. What do you see as the key skills that make a great negotiator?
Preparation.
Yeah.
Preparation in determining, what your client wants, what your client needs, what your client wants, what the other side most likely needs and wants prior to the negotiation.
Yeah.
Or maybe your client will tell you, figuring out what are sort of the things that could change in a contract versus things that need to stay the same.
Yeah.
What should be included. I use right of publicity licenses quite a bit in the things that I write. For example, just really with anything to do with marketing or website development, I think that that's important. That it's just important that we make sure we know who the owners of the intellectual property are, and that if needed, we're getting the licenses for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. And I'd normally like to end. I can't believe this has gone by super quick. We've covered a good thing that we're both quick talkers. We've covered a lot of ground. I normally like to end by asking, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? Doesn't have to be about law, can be totally off topic, but one of those moments that makes you think differently about something and affect how you show up.
I would say, actually, probably during my MBA program, there were a lot of different assessments that we took. And one of the assessments that I took, I got some feedback. We really got actual feedback about, all the different assessments, but one of them was about my body language and how people sort of perceived my body language, and how I had a lot of negative body language without, meaning to.
Yeah.
And really, I say, this is really like my thinking face, but that's not always how it's perceived or taken. So I could, could offend people unintentionally without even knowing. So I've tried to kind of think about that a little bit more as I've, grown as a person, as a professional, and kind of how I'm perceived from body language, because that's, that's the majority of, how we communicate. And that's something I'd not thought about a lot, and also just kind of neglected. So I, attended more networking events and tried to basically implement that feedback so that I could kind of be perceived the way I intend to be perceived.
Yeah. You have just opened Pandora's box here. I mean, now we need another half hour. Frankly, we're going to have to reset it to do one all about body language. And when you said your thinking face, oh my gosh, I am so cognizant. I've seen pictures of myself sometimes when I'm just sitting listening, and I think I'm just being respectful. And oh my God, talk about resting bitch face. I hate to say that, but it's wow, holy Cindy, smile, turn the corners of your mouth up or something. And just quick, before we have to sign off, can you share a few of the other body language tips, things that people pointed out were perhaps being perceived as negative? Because I agree with you. It is such an important part of negotiating and how we're perceived.
So part of it's for me at least, part of it was eye contact. I'm one of those people who naturally likes to look at the wall while I'm listening because I'm processing.
Yes, my son does that.
And I'm processing. That doesn't mean I'm not listening. So, but that can be perceived as me ignoring somebody.
Yeah.
So I have to be aware of that. And the smiling, yes, that was another thing uh, that I was not great about. But in fairness to me, some of the things that I talk about, with well, especially with clients, are not things to smile about. So knowing when to, not only do I need to smile more, knowing when is appropriate to smile, and just being cognizant of that is definitely a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And again, I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I'm totally laughing, commiserating, and thinking because when you said that about the eye
Yeah,
contact, oh, I am now embarrassed at the number of times I chastised my son, especially we've got, we started late and made up for lost time. I had 3 kids in 3 years, and my middle child had like process, he takes longer to process things, right? And he has to think about them. And exactly what you said, Alyssa, because then I would be like, Chase, for God's sake, you're not listening, or would you look at me? And he's like, I'm thinking about what you're saying. But he used to not articulate it and finally got to a stage where he's
right.
able to say that. So, and again, for our
Hmm.
listeners, that lesson goes both ways. So if you're somebody who tends to need that to process, find ways to work around that sort of processing, or even have the conversation with the person that you're dealing with as well. And on the other side, be more open, be more flexible, bring empathy to the table, because we so often misread cues, and we are terrible at perspective taking, and we attach meanings to things like, oh, they're being rude, they're being disrespectful, they're not listening, when nothing could be further from the truth. So that was a great mindset shift to end on there for us all, Alyssa. Thank you. And where can people learn more about you, Alyssa? Where would you want them to go to find out a little bit more about you and what you do?
The best place is our website at purplefoxlegal.com. Sounds spelled exactly the way it sounds.
And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. And I'd wanted to, so now I can't let you go without asking, where did that name come from? That is a highly unusual name for a law firm, and I'd love to hear the quick story behind that.
It most certainly is, and it has been nothing but good for me, thankfully. I actually launched my firm post pandemic. So I was very
Congrats.
cognizant that I needed to be distinctive. The majority of attorneys use their last name and their law firm name, and sometimes that's required by their state ethics
Mhm.
rules, which I understand. Thankfully, that was not the case for Tennessee. And I wanted something that was not my last name, that was easy to spell, easy to pronounce, had available domain names and social media handles, and came up with Purple Fox Legal. And in Purple Fox Legal, purple represents wisdom and creativity from a psychological marketing perspective.
Yeah.
And then Fox for cleverness, getting out of tricky situations, which
That's so
is
good.
most of the time what an attorney does.
Yeah.
And then legal to let people know, hey, this is something legal.
Yeah. I love it. Very creative. So kudos to you as well, post-pandemic. That's awesome. Well, thanks, Alyssa. This has been a load of fun. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I had a great time, and I hope that your listeners got a lot of insights from this conversation.
Yes, I have no doubt for our listeners out there that you got lots of value from this, lots of interesting things, and a great combination. Some's kind of technical, some a little practical. We covered the gambit here today in the short time that we've been together. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done that yet, and make sure to share this with anybody that you think could get some benefit from the messaging and some of the nuggets that got dropped here today. And before we sign off today, just wanted to share a couple of ways that we can work together. If you happen to be looking to uplevel your negotiation skills, I've got everything from online to VIP one-on-one mastermind and coaching experiences available to help you better leverage your innate power to get more of what you want and deserve in life. And if that sounds interesting, check it out at artoffemininenegotiation.com. And make sure to grab my book if you haven't done that yet, also called The Art of Feminine Negotiation. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.